My name is Emma Reynolds, and I never thought rejection could feel so physically tangible until I found myself at the entrance to Bellamy's restaurant in my graduation gown, clutching my Confederate gown and robe in my hands, while the celebration of my achievement continued inside without me. "This is for immediate family only," my Aunt Victoria said, in a voice as smooth as polished marble and just as cold. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. Everyone was already inside, laughing and eating dinner, and I, the supposed guest of honor, was deemed not close enough to deserve an invitation to my own party. Have you ever felt the ground go from under your feet when something you thought was immutable crumbles? In that moment, looking at the closed door that separated me from a celebration that no longer had anything to do with what I wanted, I felt years of quiet diminishment crystallize into perfect clarity. The countless times my voice was silenced, my accomplishments downplayed, and my presence treated as an afterthought. These were not isolated incidents, but parts of a pattern so consistent that I mistakenly accepted it as the norm. Some people discover themselves in moments of triumph. I discovered my worth in the moment I was told I didn't belong. Thinking back to my childhood, I always observed a particular hierarchy in our extended family. My mother, Catherine, was constantly deferring to her older sister, Victoria, who organized every family meeting with military precision. Her approval seemed essential to every decision, big or small. From my earliest memories, I noticed the subtle but persistent ways in which my accomplishments were downplayed, while my cousin Olivia's mediocre successes were celebrated with extravagance. Remember what it feels like to feel invisible in your own family? It doesn't happen suddenly. It's a slow, almost imperceptible process, like water eroding the base of a rock drop by drop until one day it caves in. At family reunions, I stayed at the children's table long after my cousins were promoted to adult status. When I was 13 and Olivia was 15, we were separated. She was seated with the adults. I was left with the 8-year-olds. When I asked why, Aunt Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Olivia is more mature for her age." By the time I was 16, I understood the rules of the game. When I won the regional science fair in high school, Aunt Victoria remarked that book knowledge isn't everything, and the conversation quickly turned to Olivia's upcoming performance. But when Olivia won third place in a local dance competition, the entire family attended a special dinner in her honor, where Aunt Victoria gave a 10-minute speech about dedication and talent. I often wondered if others noticed this difference in attitude. My brother Jason seemed to be adrift, taking the family dynamic for granted. He played sports, brought home medals, received approving nods from Aunt Victoria, and that was enough. My father Robert frowned from time to time when he heard a particularly harsh comment, but rarely objected openly. As for my mother, she was so used to deferring to her older sister that she didn't even seem to notice the disparity. The real tension came when I announced my plans to go to university to study psychology. We sat at Sunday lunch at Aunt Victoria's, as we did almost every month. I was waiting for the right moment when the conversation naturally flowed to future plans. "I got an offer from Westfield State University for a full scholarship," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral without betraying the excitement I really felt. There was silence for a moment. Then Aunt Victoria put down her fork and blotted the corners of her mouth with her napkin, a gesture I'd learned to recognize as a precursor to disapproval. "Psychology?" She pronounced the word as if it left a bad taste. "Why waste 4 years on a degree that would hardly lead to a stable career?" Actually, I started to explain my job prospects and my plans for graduate school, but Aunt Victoria raised her hand, interrupting me. "The local community college offers an excellent certificate program in medical administration. You could finish in 2 years and start working right away. That seems like a more appropriate choice." Appropriate. The word hangs in the air, filled with subtext. Appropriate for whom? For the girl she'd always considered less capable than her own daughter? For the niece whose academic achievements had always been slightly embarrassing because they overshadowed Olivia's? I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, a mixture of anger and helplessness that accompanied me to most family reunions. But before I could find a diplomatic response, my father cleared his throat. "Emma has earned this opportunity, Victoria," he said firmly. "We're very proud of her." It was one of the rare times my father had directly challenged his daughter-in-law's authority. The room was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the large floor clock in the hall. Aunt Victoria looked stunned, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned to my mom, with an expression that clearly said, "Control your husband." But something amazing happened. My mom, who usually immediately diffused any tension, especially that created by my father, simply smiled and said, "Yes, proud. A full scholarship is wonderful, Emma. Moving to university was a liberation I didn't even know I needed. Suddenly, I could make decisions without calculating Aunt Victoria's potential disapproval. I could choose activities based solely on my interests, not on what looked good in the eyes of my family. I could have made friends who appreciated me for who I was, rather than measuring me against my brighter cousin. But every return home for the vacations underscored the dysfunctional family dynamic I grew up with. Staying away gave me a perspective I had lacked before. Through the lens of my psychological studies, I began to recognize patterns I had previously taken for granted. I saw how my mother's childhood, as a younger sister, had established patterns that persisted into adulthood. Constant pliability, a desire to smooth over conflict at all costs, a belief that her role was to keep the peace, even if it meant sacrificing her voice or mine. I began to understand how and why my father usually backed down in the face of Aunt Victoria's pressure, preferring to support me privately rather than risk an open confrontation that could split the family. But most of all, I began to understand my own role in this dynamic, how I learned to downplay my accomplishments to avoid disapproval, how I lowered my expectations so much that being excluded from decisions about my own life seemed normal, how I accepted the narrative that being too smart or too ambitious somehow made me less worthy of love. In my third year of university, I took a course on family systems, and suddenly everything fell into place. I saw our family as a perfect example of Bowen triangles, where my aunt held the alpha position and my mother and I played the roles necessary to maintain balance. I began to realize that Aunt Victoria's disapproval of my academic success was not personal. It was a reaction to a perceived threat to the established hierarchy. The knowledge didn't bring immediate release, but it gave me the tools to begin to change. During family meetings, I began to gently but firmly assert myself. I stopped automatically giving in and seeking approval, started building a relationship with my mom outside of her sister's shadow, calling her directly instead of communicating through family channels where Aunt Victoria could interfere. Gradually, I was learning what my professors called differentiation, the ability to keep my sense of self in the context of the family without becoming consumed by groupthink. I thought I was progressing, that we were all changing little by little. So when it came time to plan my graduation celebration, I truly believed that I could create an event that would be meaningful to me, but still include my family. A simple dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, a small gathering of family and close friends from university. Nothing extravagant, just a heartfelt celebration of an important milestone. How naive of me to think that years of patterns could change so easily. Standing at the entrance to Bellamy's, I wondered if the shock I felt was more from the rejection itself or from allowing myself to hope for something different. I wondered how many more times I would let my hunger for familial acceptance overshadow the evidence of my experience. But most of all, I wondered what would happen if, instead of retreating again and smoothing over the awkwardness, I finally chose myself, my dignity, and my truth, even if it meant staying behind a door that was never meant to be opened for me. Perhaps standing there in my graduation gown, Confederate and robe in hand, I finally learned the most important lesson of my education, the realization that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to fight for a seat at the table, but to build your own. You know how sometimes you look at something that once belonged to you and you no longer recognize it? How your favorite idea gradually transforms into something completely foreign? That's exactly what happened with my graduation celebration. It started so simply. A modest but meaningful dinner at Luigi's, my favorite Italian restaurant. A place that serves the best truffle pasta, and where the owner, Marco, always welcomes you like family. I represented a small group: my parents, my brother, my immediate family, and 4 close friends from university. Cozy conversations under the soft lights, a glass of wine, simple floral arrangements on the tables, and, of course, tiramisu from the sweet corner pastry shop, which I had adored since I was 16. But you remember my Aunt Victoria, don't you? It all started with a phone call when I was up to my neck in studying for finals. Emma, darling. Her voice was oozing honey, which was always a sign of an impending offer that couldn't be refused. I was just thinking, Luigi? Really? For such an important event? I know a great place, Bellamy's. They just renovated the banquet room, and my friend Richard is the manager. I'm sure he'll give us a great discount. I tried to explain that I prefer something more intimate, more mine. But Aunt Victoria masterfully used what my family psychology professor would call covert emotional blackmail. Of course, if you want to disappoint your parents, they're so proud of you, you know. Don't they deserve to celebrate for real? One change led to another. Bellamy's doesn't work with outside caterers, so goodbye, truffle pasta, hello, standard banquet menu. Bellamy's accommodates a lot more guests, so why not invite Aunt Victoria's colleagues from the real estate agency? And Great Aunt Miriam, who I've seen twice in my life? And of course, Uncle William's business partners? With each new suggestion, my list of friends was pushed farther and farther into the background. We need to be practical, Emma. Places are limited. But somehow there was always room for one more of Aunt Victoria's business acquaintances. Even my cake, a simple but perfect tiramisu from Sweet Corner, didn't survive. A rustic dessert? Aunt Victoria gasped, looking over my planning notes that I'd carelessly left in the living room over Easter break. Graduation needs something more impressive. You know, La Pâtisserie makes amazing tiered cakes. I've already set up a tasting. 2 weeks until graduation, and my simple, meaningful evening had turned into a social event organized by Aunt Victoria, with minimal participation from me. No longer my celebration, but her show. Perhaps I would have just accepted it, as I always did. But then a text arrived that made me see the situation in a new light. Lily, Aunt Victoria's youngest daughter, usually stayed out of family dramas. 2 years younger than me, she always seemed quiet and withdrawn, absorbed in her drawings, and rarely voicing her own opinions. So her message took me by surprise. I'm sorry about Mom. She's afraid of you, always has been. You're doing what she couldn't. She wanted to go to college, but Grandpa said it was a waste of time for girls. She never got over it. I reread the message 3 times, trying to comprehend. Aunt Victoria, the bossy, confident woman who ruled our family with an iron hand, was insecure? Jealous of me? Was all her criticism, all those years of neglecting and downplaying my accomplishments, a reaction to her own unfulfilled dream? This revelation brought understanding, but not comfort, especially when I returned home after finals and found Aunt Victoria already there, in our living room, with folders and samples strewn everywhere. Emma! Finally, she barely glanced at me. It's good to have you back. We need to rethink the seating arrangements. I think it would be better if Olivia sat at the head table and your university friends could be at the one by the pillar over there. I looked around, stunned. There was a brand new seating chart on the coffee table, booklets with color palettes I'd never picked out. The day's schedule, organized minute by minute, including family photos, Reynolds only, and Victoria's welcome speech. Aunt Victoria, I began cautiously, I thought we had agreed on a small, modest celebration. She waved me away like an annoying fly. Emma, honey, it's your graduation. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You have to do it right. Right in her mind meant spectacular. And the more I looked at her plans, the clearer I saw. Every decision was made not to reflect my accomplishments or personality, but to showcase Aunt Victoria's organizational skills. This was not my party. It was her demonstration. The morning of graduation day began with the first real confrontation. I had planned to take some informal photos with university friends right after the ceremony, the six of us, having been through all the ups and downs of the past 4 years together. We wanted to capture the moment on the steps of the main campus building, where we took our first photo together as freshmen. But Aunt Victoria insisted on a professional photo shoot in the park with pre-posed family portraits. "We have a photographer booked for 2 o'clock this afternoon, right after the ceremony," she announced over breakfast. "Robert, make sure your tie matches the color scheme. Catherine, I hope you haven't forgotten that we decided to wear pastels." I could feel the protest building up inside me. This was my day, the result of 4 years of hard work, the sleepless nights of coursework, the exams I'd been through, the friends I'd shared this journey with. "Actually," I said, surprised at the firmness of my own voice, "the guys and I already have plans for a photo after the ceremony. It's a tradition of our group." Aunt Victoria stared at me as if I were speaking another language. "But the professional photographer has already been paid for, and everyone will be waiting." "Then schedule it for an hour later," I suggested, without averting my gaze. There was a pause, filled with tension. I could almost see Aunt Victoria's mind running through her options, ways to regain control. But before she could object, my father intervened. "I think we can move the photographer," he said, calmly buttering his toast. After all, it's Emma's day. It was a small victory, but it gave me strength. I may not have been able to fully regain control of my celebration, but I could still stand up for the moments that were meaningful to me. After the ceremony, with diploma in hand and a heart full of mixed emotions, proud of the accomplishment and wary of the evening ahead, I walked into the transformed Bellamy Banquet Hall, and I immediately realized that my fears were justified. The color scheme, the cool shades of lavender and silver that Aunt Victoria had always favored, was completely foreign to my taste. I love warm, earthy tones. The formal atmosphere, with white tablecloths and tall floral arrangements, was more like a corporate event than a private celebration. But most telling was the photo display at the entrance. I stopped in front of it, unable to believe my eyes. Instead of a collage of my university journey, photos from research conferences, volunteer projects, moments with friends, I saw mostly family group photos where I was barely visible. An entire section was devoted to childhood photos of my brother Jason in his sports uniform with medals and cups. Another showcased my cousin Olivia's dance accomplishments with trophies and diplomas on display. My own college journey, the very reason for the celebration, was barely present. A couple of photos from my freshman year, one from my induction ceremony into the Honorary Society of Psychology, and that was cropped so that the award I received was not visible. I felt a lump come up in my throat. How can you so systematically erase a person from their own celebration? How can you so artfully turn someone else's accomplishment into a backdrop to glorify your favorites? In that moment, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could do what I'd always done, smile, swallow my resentment, play my assigned role as the quiet, inconspicuous niece to keep the family peace. Or I could finally admit that some things can't be fixed with compromises and concessions. That sometimes the only way to be true to yourself is to refuse to participate in a farce that denies your existence. I didn't yet know what choice I would make, but for the first time I saw clearly that it was indeed a choice, and that the price I'd paid for so long in giving in had become prohibitive. If you've ever felt that your accomplishments are being downplayed or appropriated, that your voice is being drowned out, that your presence is being devalued, know that you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments, give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel to find out how my story unfolded next, and how I finally found the strength to stand up for my worth. Have you ever felt the last straw overflow the cup of patience? Not an abrupt, dramatic realization, but a quiet, inevitable realization that you can no longer ignore what is happening. For me, Such a moment came when I saw my university friends standing in bewilderment at the entrance to the banquet hall. Sarah, Josh, Alex, and May, the people who had supported me through all 4 years of school, sat with me late into the night before exams, celebrated every little accomplishment, and wiped away tears after every failure. They had come 2 hours in advance to share the big day with me, and there they stood, bewildered, in front of my Uncle William, who was studying some list on a clipboard with the look of a man on an important mission. "What's the problem?" I asked, approaching them. "Ms. Reynolds, we can't find the names of your friends' names on the guest list," the room manager explained, giving me an apologetic look. "These are my guests," I said. "I personally added them to the list." Uncle William cleared his throat with that peculiar expression of embarrassment that came whenever he had to voice his wife's decisions. Victoria busied herself with the final list. Perhaps there had been some mistake. As if on cue, Aunt Victoria materialized beside us, radiating that special blend of authority and disapproval that she had perfected over the years. "What's the matter?" she asked, though it was clear from her face that she understood the situation perfectly well. "My friends from the university came as we planned," I explained, trying to remain calm. "But for some reason, they weren't on the guest list." Aunt Victoria gave my friends a cold smile, not even bothering to address them directly. "The guest list was finalized yesterday," she said, looking at me with an expression that should have seemed patient, but didn't hide her irritation. "Adding people now would disrupt the seating chart." "But they were on the original list," I objected. "I included them myself." "Obviously, there was a misunderstanding," she said in a tone that brooked no further objection. "William, why don't you show the guests to the bar? They can have a drink while Emma and I work this out." Without waiting for an answer, she took me under the elbow and led me away as my friends awkwardly departed with Uncle William. "Emma," she said in that special condescending tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable, "tonight is for family, for the people who have truly been a part of your journey. Your college buddies are temporary connections. In 5 years, you won't even remember their names." Those words hit me with unexpected force. Temporary connections? People with whom I'd lived some of the most formative years of my life. And who did she consider really part of my journey? Her business acquaintances, whom I'd met once or twice at family barbecues? The systematic exclusion continued when I discovered that no table seating was provided for my friends. Moreover, I myself was seated at a small table by the kitchen door, far from the main family table. Even at my own graduation party, I found myself literally and figuratively on the periphery. Looking at the seating chart, I felt a clear, cold realization grow inside. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a series of unfortunate changes. This was a deliberate, systematic effort to minimize my presence at my own party. I remembered Lily's words that Aunt Victoria was afraid of me, that my accomplishments were a painful reminder of her own unfulfilled dreams. But understanding a person's motives doesn't make their actions any less painful. Empathy has its limits, and I felt I was approaching mine. "I'll go get something from the car," I said to my mom, who was watching anxiously but, as usual, didn't intervene. Stepping out into the parking lot, I took a deep breath of the evening air. The sky was beginning to darken, taking on that special shade of navy blue that comes before dusk. I opened the trunk and pulled out my graduation robe and Confederate robe. For 4 years, I had put all of myself into my studies. Research, papers, presentations, internships, anything to graduate with honors, despite Aunt Victoria's constant hints that higher education is overrated. That robe and Confederate gown were symbols not only of academic achievement, but also of my independence, my choice to follow my own path against family pressure. I put them on, feeling strangely calm. Perhaps a visual reminder of what we were really celebrating, my graduation, could refocus the evening, give it back some genuine meaning. When I returned to the auditorium, Aunt Victoria's reaction was immediate and harsh. "Take it off right now," she demanded, coming toward me so fast that her heels clattered on the marble floor. It looks theatrical and draws unnecessary attention. This is a sophisticated family gathering, not a masquerade. I looked at her, impeccably dressed, with perfect hair and makeup, radiating confidence and control. And suddenly, I didn't see the formidable figure I'd feared all my life, but simply a woman clinging to the illusion of perfection, protecting her fragile ego from any perceived threat. "This is my graduation, Aunt Victoria," I said calmly. "It's a symbol of what I've accomplished, and I want to wear it." Her face tensed, and for a moment I saw a glimmer of something akin to panic in her eyes. She wasn't used to open defiance, especially from me. "You've always been so insensitive," she said with a strained smile. "But today isn't about you, dear. It's about family, about tradition. Not about me? My own graduation celebration isn't about me?" As we stood there exchanging tense glances, I noticed movement at the far end of the hall. My friends were heading toward the exit, escorted by a member of the establishment's staff. I recognized his gesture, a polite but firm pointing at the door, the kind used when asking unwanted guests to leave. "What's going on?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Why are my friends being sent away?" Aunt Victoria didn't even bother to act surprised. I explained to them that there had been a misunderstanding about the invitations, she said with a slight shrug. They understood. I took a step in their direction, but she blocked my path. "Emma, the party is just getting started." Her voice was soft, but the words that followed hit like a slap. "But it's really only for immediate family." In that moment, all the years of subtle neglect crystallized into a moment of blatant exclusion. The pieces of the mosaic fell into place with stunning clarity. I was not part of this celebration. I wasn't even the center of it. I was just an excuse for Aunt Victoria to show off her organizational talents, to assert her status, and perhaps finally put me in the place she thought appropriate. Somewhere on the periphery, quiet and grateful for any attention. I looked at the robe and Confederate gown I still held, symbols of the independence and education I had fought for in defiance of Aunt Victoria's disapproval. Then I calmly removed the Confederate robe and folded the mantle in my hand. "I understand now," I said with unexpected firmness in my voice. "I think I'll celebrate somewhere else. You know what the weirdest thing is? I expected to feel hurt, angry, humiliated, but instead, I was filled with an amazing calm. It was as if, after years of suppressing my own feelings for the sake of family peace, after endless compromises and concessions, I had finally found my line in the sand. I saw the situation for what it was, not through the eyes of a child hungry for approval, but through the eyes of a grown woman realizing her worth. Instead of breaking under the weight of that rejection, I simply turned around and walked toward the exit. Not dramatically, not slamming the door or throwing accusations, just calmly walking away from a situation that no longer served my well-being or dignity. I found my friends in the parking lot. They were standing, confused and concerned, next to Sarah's car. "What's going on, Em?" Josh, always the most straightforward of us, asked. "That woman, your aunt, practically pushed us out the door." I explained what had happened, trying to keep my voice, even though my emotions were raging inside. How my celebration had been appropriated and transformed. How my wishes had been ignored. How even now, at the last moment, I was relegated to the background in my own life. This is crazy." May, usually the calmest of us, was outraged. "It's your day. How can they do this to you?" As we were talking, I heard my name and turned around. To my surprise, my dad was rushing toward us, followed by my brother Jason, my cousin Lily, and her boyfriend Ethan. "Emma!" my dad called out, coming closer. His face expressed a mixture of worry and determination that I hadn't seen before. "What's going on? Why are you leaving?" I explained again, succinctly and without accusation. Just the facts. My friends were asked to leave. I was segregated from my family, and Aunt Victoria made it clear that this event was not for me, even though it was supposedly in my honor. She said it was for close family only. I finished. trying to hide the tremor in my voice. I expected my father to try to smooth things over like he always did, to offer a compromise, to ask me to come back to keep the peace. But instead, there was a look on his face that I hadn't seen in years, a quiet but firm determination. "Then we'll leave together," he said simply. "We?" I asked, not sure I understood. "Of course," Jason, my usually aloof brother, interjected. "If you're getting kicked out of your own prom, what's the point of us staying?" Lily came over and took my hand. "I told you, my mom is inadequate," she said with a sad smile. "But you don't have to put up with this. No one should." I stared at them, stunned. For the first time in my memory, members of my family were openly opposing the established order, against the carefully constructed hierarchy that had governed our family gatherings for decades. And they didn't do it for some great principle or after much debate. They did it for me. You know how sometimes in the midst of chaos and frustration, there are moments of unexpected clarity? When all the confusion and pain suddenly makes sense, and you realize that there is something much deeper behind all the actions than first thought? Such a moment came for me in the parking lot of Bellamy's restaurant, where our impromptu group had gathered in confusion and bewilderment. I was still clutching the folded robe in my hands when Lily, glancing over my shoulder to make sure no one from the restaurant had followed us, stepped closer and lowered her voice. "There's something you should know," she said, nervously tucking a strand behind her ear. "Mom found out about your acceptance to Eastman's graduate school. She's furious that you were accepted into the program that rejected Olivia last year. She kept saying that you flaunted your academic success and needed to be taught humility." I froze, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. Graduate school? I had received my acceptance letter only 3 days ago and had yet to tell anyone except my university friends. How could Aunt Victoria know? "She goes through your mail," Lily explained, as if reading my mind. "When you left for exams, she told Mom that she needed to check something in your room for party planning. I saw her sitting at your computer. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place. The escalation of Aunt Victoria's interference in the party plans, the emphasis on professional connections, the deliberate exclusion, all of it was a calculated response to her perception that I was somehow threatening her daughter's status. It revealed the depth of my aunt's insecurity and her inability to rejoice in other people's successes, even those of her own niece. I remembered all of my aunt's odd comments in recent days. It's always nice when young people strive for an education, though real life usually has other plans. Olivia is choosing a more mature path, focusing on her career rather than more theoretical studies. Academia is so insulated from the real world, don't you think? But why can't she just be happy for me? I asked, more to myself than to anyone in particular. "Because then she'd have to admit that Olivia wasn't perfect," Lily answered with a sad smile. "And that would shatter her carefully constructed world." Our conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Uncle William, who was shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot at the edge of the parking lot. He always looked a little out of place in his role as his wife's messenger, as if the jacket he wore was a size smaller. "Emma, Victoria asks you to come back so we can clear up this misunderstanding," he said, without looking me in the eye. "The guests are asking for you." I felt a wave of fatigue wash over me. Another round of pretense? Another attempt to pretend everything was fine while I was systematically sidelined? But before I could answer, my father stepped forward, his normally soft face taking on an unexpected hardness. "William, you can tell Victoria that we've decided to celebrate Emma's achievement elsewhere," he said calmly but firmly. "Anyone who genuinely wants to honor her achievement is welcome to join us." Uncle William blinked, clearly not expecting such bluntness from my usually compliant father. He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded with the look of a man who realizes he's in a losing position. "I'll pass it on," he said quietly, and turned to leave, but then stopped. "And Emma, congratulations on graduating. For real." As he walked back into the restaurant, like a messenger bringing bad news to his monarch, we stood in silence, trying to make sense of what had happened. So, Josh finally said, breaking the silence, any idea where we can celebrate our graduation properly? The question hung in the air for a moment, and then, as sometimes happens in moments of crisis, the solution came out of nowhere. The park by the river, I suggested. It's only 10 minutes from here, and it should be beautiful tonight. Riverside Park had always been one of my favorite places in the city. Growing up, my dad and I used to go there often on Sundays, while my mom and Aunt Victoria discussed family matters. It was our special place where we'd launch our boats on the water and make stories about where they might go. That's a great idea, my dad encouraged, with unexpected enthusiasm. And you know what? I have something in the car that might come in handy. We split up into cars, and 15 minutes later, we were in the park. The light was starting to turn golden, taking on that special evening hue that photographers call golden hour. My friends laid out plaids by the water. Ethan pulled a portable speaker out of the trunk, and Jason, who was always ready for impromptu picnics, pulled out folding cups and a bottle of champagne. But the real surprise was my father, who came back from his car holding the familiar white box from Sweet Corner Bakery. Dad? I couldn't believe my eyes. This isn't your tiramisu, he finished with a smile. I ordered it a week ago and hid it in the garage. I wanted to surprise you, no matter how the official party turned out. I felt a lump come up in my throat. All these months, while I thought my original vision of the celebration had been completely destroyed, my father had secretly kept at least part of it alive. As the sun began to sink, illuminating the water and trees with a soft golden light, friends laid out the food they had brought, opened the champagne, and we created our own celebration. No formalities, no rigid rules, just people who genuinely wanted to mark an important moment in my life. May I make a toast? Dad asked, as everyone settled on plaids with filled glasses. He stood up, a little nervous, but with a determination in his gaze that I had rarely seen in him. Today, we celebrate not only Emma's academic achievement, which is impressive in itself, but also the incredible person she has become, he began, his voice growing more confident with each word. Your grandmother often said that true education is not just about knowledge, but about developing the wisdom to use that knowledge. Well, Emma, you've learned not only psychological theories, but you've learned to recognize unhealthy dynamics and found the courage to set boundaries. Perhaps that is the most valuable education of all. His words brought tears to my eyes. All my life, I had longed for such recognition, not for grades or accomplishments, but for who I had become as a person. And I got it not from my aunt, whose approval I had sought for so long, but from my father, who had always been there for me, quietly supporting me with his steady, unobtrusive love. What began as a humiliation was transformed into something unexpectedly beautiful, a genuine celebration surrounded by people who truly cared about me. We ate simple food, drank champagne out of plastic cups, laughed at university stories that my friends enjoyed telling my family. And most amazingly, the evening continued to hold surprises. About an hour after we arrived, two familiar figures appeared in the park. My uncles Michael and David, my father's brothers, who had left the formal party to join us. We heard the real fun is here, Uncle Michael said, holding out a gift bag to me. Congratulations, smart girl. I always knew you'd go far. They'd brought folding chairs, more food, and the real gift, a set of professional psychology books I'd dreamed of. As dusk thickened, another figure appeared on the horizon. My mother was walking through the park, carrying several gift bags and looking both exhausted and relieved. Her usually immaculate hair was a little disheveled, and her face showed signs of recent tears. Mom? I stood up, not believing my eyes. What are you doing here? She came over, set the bags down, and hugged me tightly, not the careful, restrained hug I was used to, but a real, emotional one. I finally told Victoria what I should have said years ago, she whispered in my ear, that my daughter deserved a celebration on her own terms, and that I would no longer let her dictate how I should love my family. In that moment, under a starry sky, with the warmth of loved ones all around me, I realized that I had received so much more than just a graduation celebration. I received confirmation that my worth is not dependent on the approval of those who can't or won't see it, that a true family is those who see you for who you are and love you because of it, not in spite of it. Of course, that wasn't the end of the Aunt Victoria story. Setting healthy family boundaries is a marathon, not a sprint. But that night was the first crucial step toward a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect, not control and hierarchy. If my story resonates with your soul, if you too have struggled for the right to be seen and valued in your own life, know that you are not alone. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to participate in a narrative that devalues us and create a space where we can thrive on our own terms. Share in the comments your experience setting healthy boundaries or the moment when you first felt truly valued. Get likes and subscribe to the channel for more stories of transformation, self-determination, and healing family relationships. You know how sometimes the most important conversations in life happen in the most mundane places? A week after graduation, I was sitting in the Morning Light coffee shop downtown, nervously twirling a cup of latte in my hands. The choice of location had been strategic. Neutral territory, a public space where emotions were easier to keep in check. Through the window, I watched Aunt Victoria park her immaculate silver Lexus and head toward the entrance. Have you ever prepared for a conversation that could change the entire dynamic of your relationship? I rehearsed my words all night, waking up with new wording that seemed either too harsh or not clear enough. But when Aunt Victoria sat down across from me, with perfect posture and a strained smile, I knew I was ready. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began, as if she had initiated our meeting. "I think we need to clear up some misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. An interesting choice of word to describe the years of systematic devaluation that culminated in my expulsion from my own graduation party. "I didn't come here to argue about the past, Aunt Victoria," I said calmly, surprised at the firmness of my voice. "I came here to be clear about the future." I took a deep breath and continued. "I will not participate in family events where I am treated like a minor character or where my accomplishments are downplayed. I will not pretend everything is fine when it's not. And I won't maintain an unhealthy dynamic for the sake of maintaining a semblance of peace." Aunt Victoria froze with her cup halfway to her lips. In 22 years, I've never once spoken so directly to her. Her silence before my directness marked a profound shift in our relationship. "I'm not asking you to change," I continued. "I'm simply communicating the boundaries I'm setting for myself. You can choose to honor them or not, but your choice will determine the nature of our relationship in the future." For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of vulnerability in her eyes, a quick, almost imperceptible glimmer. But it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of restraint. "You've always been overly sensitive, Emma," she finally said, but her voice lacked her usual confidence. "Family relationships require compromise." "Yes, compromise," I agreed, "but not one-sided concessions, not erasing myself to conform to other people's expectations." We talked for another hour or so, circling decades of accumulated resentments and unspoken words. Nothing was finalized, but something fundamental had changed. It was as if the gravity that had held our family system in a certain state for years had suddenly changed direction. The months after graduation brought significant change. I accepted an offer to attend graduate school in psychology at Eastman University, which meant moving to a city 3 hours away. The physical distance provided a natural buffer while the family began the messy process of redefining relationships and expectations. My decision to move was met with mixed reactions. My mom was upset that I would be so far away, but supportive of my choice. Dad was proud but worried about the practicalities. Aunt Victoria didn't express her opinion directly, but through the family grapevine, it came to me that she called my departure a predictable desire for drama. The first few months at Eastman were both daunting and liberating. New town, new people, new challenges. For the first time, I was building a life entirely on my own terms, without having to constantly calculate how my decisions would be perceived by the family hierarchy. I came home once a month, usually for the weekend. These visits were a strange mix of old patterns and new discoveries. I noticed how my mom was gradually finding her voice in conversations with my sister, how my dad was voicing his opinion more often, how Lily started coming to our house more often, creating her own relationship with the rest of the family, independent of her mother. Of course, not everything changed smoothly. There were awkward moments, tense family dinners, reticences. Aunt Victoria still occasionally tried to seize control, though now with more caution. But each time I set a boundary, politely but firmly, something in the family dynamic shifted a little more. 6 months later, as the holiday season approached, we faced the first major test of our new family paradigm. Thanksgiving had traditionally been spent at Aunt Victoria's house, with its elaborate menu, impeccable decor, and strict division of roles. But this year, my parents decided to do it themselves. "We thought it would be more convenient for you if the celebration was closer to Eastman," my mom explained over the phone, even though we both knew it wasn't just a matter of logistics. Nothing extravagant, just a warm family dinner. I appreciated the symbolism of the gesture. My parents weren't just changing locations, they were reshaping the very structure of family relationships, relinquishing their role as perpetual guests at Aunt Victoria's house. The week before Thanksgiving, something happened that I never would have predicted. My phone rang, and a name I hadn't seen since our meeting at the coffee shop popped up on the screen. "Aunt Victoria!" I answered with a cautious, "Hello?" not knowing what to expect. "Emma!" Her voice sounded unusually uncertain. "I'm calling to find out. Would it be acceptable if William and I joined the celebration?" The question represented a seismic shift in the family power dynamics. Aunt Victoria, who always determined who was invited and who wasn't, was now asking permission to attend. She was recognizing my voice in shaping family events, something she had never done before. "Of course," I replied, trying to hide my surprise. "I think Mom and Dad will be pleased to see you." There was a pause, and then she added, "And you? Would it be nice to see us?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and vulnerability. "Yes," I said after a moment of reflection. "If we all respect each other's boundaries, it will be nice to get together." Thanksgiving turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. Our family home was transformed by my mom's decorations of dried leaves and pumpkins, creating a cozy atmosphere without pretension to magazine perfection. Aunt Victoria and Uncle William arrived right on time, she with her signature cranberry sauce, he with a bottle of good wine. I watched Aunt Victoria make a visible effort to participate unchecked. She bit her tongue several times when things weren't done exactly as she would have preferred. When Mom forgot to reheat the scones, she simply offered to help instead of uttering one of her trademark passive-aggressive phrases about attention to detail. While cleaning up after dinner, my mom joined me in the kitchen, lovingly cradling me with her hip like she used to do when I was a kid. "Look at us," she said, handing me a washed plate to wipe up. "Who would have thought that standing in the parking lot in dressy clothes would lead to all these changes?" I smiled, remembering that pivotal moment in my life. "Being asked to wait outside was the invitation I needed to find where I truly belonged," I replied. And it was true. Sometimes the most painful exceptions become doors to more authentic inclusion. Sometimes we need to completely lose our sense of belonging to discover that true belonging never requires erasing ourselves. Our family hasn't reached perfection yet. I doubt any family ever does. Aunt Victoria was still wrestling with her own demons. My mom still slipped into old patterns sometimes, and I was still learning to stand up for myself without putting up walls. But now we had new tools, clarity about who we were and what we needed, a willingness to speak the truth with compassion, an understanding that a real family is not created by blood or commitment, but by a conscious choice to see and respect each other. In the end, I realized that bringing the family back didn't mean returning to old dynamics or power structures. It meant creating a new kind of family, one that could grow and change, one where every voice mattered, one where love wasn't conditional or dependent on following unspoken rules. And perhaps most importantly, I realized that my worth had never depended on the recognition of those who couldn't or wouldn't see it. It was always inside of me, waiting for me to finally give myself permission to see it and stand up for it. If you recognize yourself in my story, if you too have struggled for the right to be visible in your own life, or to set healthy boundaries with those who should love you unconditionally, know that you are not alone. Sometimes the most important step to healing is realizing that you deserve a seat at the table, not because someone else gives it to you, but because it has always been yours by right. Share in the comments your experience of setting boundaries in your family, or the moment when you first felt truly seen. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth stories of self-discovery, family dynamics, and personal growth.